All right, so we've got these articles about multiple sclerosis, all about MS.
Yeah.
We've got some really good resources here from Johns Hopkins Medicine and MS Australia.
Yeah, those are great.
I'm interested to see what we find out.
It's a fascinating topic, and
Yeah.
it's
Oh.
more common than you might think.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's actually the most common chronic neurological disease for young adults.
Huh.
Yeah,
I had no idea.
yeah.
Okay, well, let's start with the basics then.
Okay.
What is multiple sclerosis?
So multiple sclerosis, or MS, it's a chronic autoimmune disease,
Okay.
which basically means that the body's immune system, which is supposed to protect us, right?
Right.
It mistakenly attacks parts of the central nervous system.
So the central nervous system, that's the brain and spinal cord.
That's right, yeah.
Okay.
And so to understand what goes wrong in MS, it's helpful to kind of picture the insulation around an electrical wire.
Okay.
Right? That helps the electrical signals travel smoothly. Well, in the nervous system, we have a similar type of insulation called myelin,
Okay.
and that wraps around the nerve fibers,
Okay.
and it helps messages travel efficiently between the brain and the rest of the body.
Okay, so it's kind of like the myelins is protecting the signal.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great way to think about it.
Okay.
So how does this all relate to MS?
Yeah.
Well, in MS, what happens is the immune system starts attacking this myelin,
Well,
and it strips it away.
Right.
So it disrupts those nerve signals, kind of like damaging that insulation on the electrical wire, right?
Yeah.
And that's what causes all these different symptoms we see in MS.
So it's like the brain's trying to send a message,
Yes.
but it's not being received properly because the signal's all messed up.
That's a perfect way to put it, yeah.
Okay. And is MS contagious?
No, MS is not contagious.
Okay,
You
good.
can't catch it from somebody else.
Right.
It's really important to clarify that because sometimes there's misconceptions around that.
Oh, for sure. So it seems like reading through these articles,
Yeah?
MS can have a lot of different symptoms.
It can, yeah.
It's not just one thing.
Yeah, it's one of the challenging things about MS
Oh, really?
is that the symptoms can be really different from person to person.
So it's not like you can just look at someone and say, oh, I know what you have.
Exactly. It's not like that at all.
Okay. Well, what are some of the common symptoms then?
So some of the common ones that you might see
Okay.
would be like vision problems.
Oh, that.
Things might get blurry.
Mm.
You could have double vision.
Oh, wow.
Fatigue. That's a really big one.
Yeah.
Really common symptom. And it can be really debilitating for people with MS.
And I was reading also about like difficulty walking and even just like tingling sensations.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like pins and needles?
Exactly. Those are all really classic symptoms.
Okay.
And then there's things like balance issues, cognitive changes. So that can be trouble with memory or thinking clearly,
Wow.
and even speech problems sometimes.
So it sounds like some of these symptoms you can't really see.
You can't, yeah, a lot of them are invisible. Yeah.
Okay. So it's not always obvious
Not always obvious.
that someone might be struggling with this.
Right. And that can make getting a diagnosis tricky
Really?
because the symptoms can be so varied and they can also come and go.
Oh, wow. So it's not like, oh, this always happens.
Not necessarily, no.
Oh.
It can be a little bit of a moving target.
Well, I'm guessing early diagnosis is important.
It is, yeah.
I was reading in one of the articles about someone who finally got a diagnosis and they were actually relieved
Absolutely.
because it had been years of uncertainty
Right.
trying to figure out what was wrong.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because early diagnosis allows for early treatment,
Okay.
which can really make a big difference in managing the disease.
Okay, so let's talk about diagnosis.
Okay.
How do you actually know that you have MS?
Well, you're right. It's not a simple blood test or anything.
Right.
There's no single test for MS. So doctors use a combination of different tools and assessments to make the diagnosis.
Okay.
So they'll do a neurological exam to check things like reflexes, coordination, balance.
I'm guessing MRIs are important?
They are, yeah. MRIs are really important because they allow us to visualize the brain and spinal cord and to look for signs of damage to the myelin.
And the articles also mentioned blood tests and something called a lumbar puncture.
Yeah, that's right.
What are those all about?
So the blood tests are mainly to rule out other conditions that might mimic MS.
Okay.
There are other things that can cause similar symptoms.
Makes sense.
So it's important to rule those out.
Okay.
And then the lumbar puncture, sometimes called a spinal tap,
Okay.
that involves taking a sample of the cerebrospinal fluid
Oh, wow.
that surrounds the brain and spinal cord.
Mm-hmm.
And they can analyze this fluid for specific markers
Oh.
that indicate an immune system attack.
So they're really looking at all this data
Yeah, they're putting the pieces together.
to try to figure out what's going on.
Right, exactly.
And I read something about dissemination in time and space.
Yes.
What is that?
So dissemination in time and space, it sounds very complex.
It does.
But basically what it means is that doctors are looking for evidence
Okay.
that the damage isn't isolated to just one spot or one moment in time.
Okay, so over time.
Over time and in different places.
And different places.
Yeah. That's a key part of confirming the MS diagnosis.
Okay, and the articles also briefly mention something called clinically isolated syndrome.
Yes.
CIS. What's that?
So CIS, it's kind of like a first warning sign, you could say.
Okay.
It's the first episode of neurological symptoms
Mm-hmm.
caused by that inflammation and damage to the myelin.
Okay.
Now, not everybody with CIS goes on to develop MS,
Okay.
but it's definitely something that doctors watch closely.
So it's like they're watching for more signs.
Yeah.
To see what happens.
Right, to see if it progresses.
Okay, well, I was reading that there's different types of MS.
There are, yeah.
So it's not just one kind.
It's not one size fits all, no.
Okay, so what are the different types?
So there are three main types.
Yeah.
Relapsing remitting MS,
Okay.
secondary progressive MS, and primary progressive MS.
3 different types.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's start with the most common one.
Okay, so the most common type is relapsing remitting MS,
Okay.
often shortened to RRMS.
RMS.
And this is characterized by periods of relapse where symptoms flare up,
Okay.
followed by periods of remission where symptoms improve or disappear completely.
So it's like up and down, up and down.
Yeah, kind of like a roller coaster.
Yeah,
exactly.
that-
And about 85% of people are initially diagnosed with RMS.
Wow. Okay, so that's the most common.
That's the most common, yeah.
What about secondary progressive MS?
So secondary progressive MS, or SPMS.
Mm-hmm.
This usually develops after an initial period of relapsing remitting MS.
Okay.
And in this type, the disease starts to progress more steadily, with or without relapses.
So it's not like those clear ups and downs anymore.
It can be, but it's more of a steady progression.
Okay.
Thankfully, though,
Yeah.
with the newer disease-modifying therapies we have now,
Okay.
the risk of developing SPMS has actually decreased.
Yep.
And the onset is typically much later, often more than 20 years after that initial diagnosis.
Oh, that's good to know.
Yeah.
And then what about that last one?
So the last one is primary progressive MS,
Okay.
or PPMS.
Okay.
This one is less common than the other two.
Okay.
And in PPMS, there's a gradual worsening of neurological function
Okay.
right from the beginning without those distinct relapses and remissions.
So it's more like a steady decline.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
It's more of a steady progression.
Okay, so the big question, of course, is why?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
Why do people get MS?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there's no easy answer.
Right.
We think that it's caused by a combination of factors,
Right.
not just one thing.
Yeah, the articles mentioned genetics,
Yeah.
infections, geographic location, vitamin D levels, smoking.
A whole bunch of things.
Well, let's start with genetics then.
Okay, so genetics plays a role.
Okay.
MS is not directly inherited,
Okay.
but having a family history of the disease can increase your risk.
Okay.
But it's important to remember that most people with MS don't have a family history of the disease.
Oh.
And most people with a family history don't develop MS.
So genes aren't the only factor.
Genes are just one piece of the puzzle.
Okay.
Like-
Yeah. And then there was infections.
Yeah, so infections, particularly the Epstein-Barr virus,
Okay.
that causes glandular fever.
Mhm.
There's research suggesting that EBV infection might trigger an immune response
Okay.
that increases the risk of developing MS.
So it's not the virus itself,
It's not the virus itself, no.
but the body's reaction.
It's the body's reaction to it, yeah.
Interesting.
It could be a contributing factor.
And then geographic location.
Yeah. Geographic location is interesting
Yeah.
because MS is more common in areas that are farther from the equator.
Okay.
So that's led scientists to investigate the role of sunlight and vitamin D.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was reading that in one of the articles
Yeah.
that said something about people living in northern Queensland, Australia,
Yes.
being less likely to develop MS compared to Tasmania.
Right, exactly.
That is further south.
And that really ties in with the vitamin D piece.
Yeah.
Because our bodies produce vitamin D in response to sunlight.
Right.
And studies have shown a link between low vitamin D levels and an increased risk of MS.
So getting enough sun and therefore enough vitamin D
Yeah.
could be protective.
It could be. Yeah, that's what the research suggests.
Okay.
It's definitely a promising avenue for more research.
What about smoking?
Oh, smoking. Yes, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Smoking has been definitively linked to an increased risk of developing MS.
Okay.
And it can also worsen the disease course.
So another reason to not smoke.
Absolutely, yeah. Another good reason to quit.
Okay, so we talked about what MS is.
Yeah.
We talked about the symptoms,
Yeah.
how it's diagnosed, potential causes.
Yeah.
But I think the big question is,
What can you do about it?
yeah, what can you do about it?
That's a great question, and that's what we'll be diving into next time.
Okay.
We're going to explore all the treatment options.
Awesome.
Both medication and lifestyle changes that can help people manage their symptoms.
Okay.
And really live well with MS.
Great. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, me too. So we're back.
Back to talk about treatment for MS.
Yeah.
We've spent some time now understanding, what is MS?
Yeah.
What are the different types, how it's diagnosed,
Right.
and the potential causes.
Absolutely.
But I think the big question now is,
Yeah, what can you do about it?
what can you do about it?
That's the big question. And luckily,
Yeah.
while there's no cure for MS yet, there are definitely treatments that can help manage the disease, slow down its progression, and improve quality of life for people with MS.
That's great.
Yeah.
And it's not just a case of popping a pill, right?
You're right. It's not just medication.
Okay.
It really is a multi-pronged approach.
Okay.
And MS Australia, they've got this brain health guide.
Yeah.
And they really emphasize this holistic approach
That's really cool.
to living well with MS.
Okay, so medication is part of it though, right?
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
One of the key pillars is medication,
Okay.
specifically what we call disease-modifying therapies, or DMTs.
DMTs.
Yeah, it's a bit of a mouthful.
Okay, well, break those down for us.
Okay, so basically,
Yeah.
DMTs are medications
Mm-hmm.
that are designed to target the immune system's attack on that myelin.
Okay.
Remember how we talked about that before?
Yeah.
So it's like trying to calm down that immune response
Okay.
and prevent further damage.
So they're not curing the disease, they're just stopping it.
They're trying to stop it in its tracks, yeah.
Oh.
And the good news is there are now over a dozen different DMTs available.
Wow.
So doctors can really tailor the treatment to
Okay,
each
cool.
person's individual needs.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot more options than there used to be.
There definitely are. It's a really exciting time in MS research and treatment.
That's awesome. And I really like how this brain health guide talks about other things as well,
Yeah.
not just medication.
They highlight how important lifestyle factors are for
Right.
managing MS and promoting that overall brain health.
So things like staying active, doing like cognitive activities,
Mm-hmm.
managing stress.
Exactly. All of those things.
Okay.
So physical activity, for example,
Yeah.
can help improve strength,
Okay.
balance, coordination, and it can also boost mood and cognitive function.
Oh, wow.
So it's a real win-win.
Yeah, for sure.
And, fatigue
Yeah.
is such a big issue for people with MS.
Mm.
So exercise can be really helpful for managing that.
Okay.
And then cognitive engagement. Things like reading, puzzles, learning new skills can help keep your mind sharp
Mm.
and potentially slow cognitive decline.
Okay. And they talked about weight management,
Yeah, weight management is important.
which can be tricky.
It can be for anyone,
Yeah.
but especially for those with MS who might have mobility issues.
Mm.
But maintaining a healthy weight
Yeah.
can help reduce inflammation throughout the body,
Okay.
which is good for everyone, but particularly for people with MS.
Right. Makes sense.
And then stress management.
Yeah. Stress.
Everyone can benefit from that,
Yeah.
but it's especially crucial for people with a chronic illness like MS
Right.
because stress can really exacerbate symptoms.
Wow.
So finding healthy ways to manage it
Mhm.
is really, really essential.
Okay. So that could be like meditation, yoga.
Yeah, meditation, yoga, spending time in nature, talking to a therapist.
Therapy.
It's really about finding what works for you.
Okay. Yeah. That's important.
Yeah. And then having a good support system.
Yeah. People around you who get it.
Yeah, people who understand, absolutely.
Right.
So that means family, friends, healthcare professionals
Okay.
who understand and support you.
Mm-hmm.
That can make a huge difference.
And then rehabilitation.
Yes, rehabilitation is really important.
Yeah.
It can help people with MS regain function,
Okay.
adapt to challenges, and maintain their independence.
So that could be physical therapy.
Physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy.
Okay. So it's kind of like a customized plan.
It really depends on the individual's needs, yeah.
Okay.
It's team effort,
Yeah.
medication, lifestyle modifications,
Mhm.
rehabilitation,
Yeah.
all working together.
So are you feeling hopeful about the future for people with MS?
I am. I really am.
Yeah, I am too. Reading through this, it seems like.
There's been so much progress in terms of treatment and our understanding of the disease.
Yeah.
And this focus on a holistic approach, I think, is really empowering,
Yeah, for sure.
to take control of their own health.
And it sounds like there's a lot more research being done.
There's a lot of ongoing research.
Which is always good.
Always good.
So it seems like there's hope for more treatments in the future.
Absolutely.
And better understanding.
Yeah, that's what we're all hoping for.
Okay. Well, we've learned a lot about MS today.
We have.
But it's important to remember that everyone's experience is unique.
Absolutely.
It's not a one-size-fits-all disease.
The symptoms, the progression, the response to treatment can vary widely from person to person.
So I guess what we're saying is
Yeah.
it's important to work with your doctor.
Absolutely. Yeah. Work closely with your healthcare team
Yeah.
to develop that personalized treatment plan
Yeah. To figure out what's best for you.
that meets your specific needs and goals.
Okay, great.
That's what it's all about, finding what works best for each individual.
On their MS journey.
Yeah, exactly.
Welcome back.
We're back for the final part of our deep dive into MS.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey exploring all the different aspects
It really has.
of this complex disease.
Yeah, we've covered a lot.
We've covered the basics of what MS is,
Mm-hmm.
the common symptoms, how it's diagnosed,
Right.
the different types, the treatment options.
We've really tried to unpack these resources.
Yeah.
Give people a solid overview.
Yeah. But before we wrap things up,
Yeah.
I think there's something important that we need to touch on.
Okay, what's that?
The emotional and social impact
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
of living with MS.
That's a really important point.
Yeah, it's easy to focus on just the physical stuff,
Right, the medical aspects.
but there's a whole other side to
It is.
living with a chronic illness like this.
Yeah, and it's not just about the physical symptoms.
Right.
It's about the emotional and psychological challenges as well.
Yeah, and I imagine just getting that diagnosis can be so overwhelming.
It can, yeah.
It's like, what does this mean for my future?
Exactly. There's so much uncertainty around it.
It
Yeah.
can be really anxiety provoking.
Yeah, so I was reading in the articles about the importance of mental health support
Absolutely.
for people with MS.
Yeah, that's so crucial.
Okay.
Having access to those resources, support systems,
Yeah.
to help people cope with all those emotions
Right.
can be a real roller coaster.
Yeah, so things like therapy, support groups,
groups.
or even just having like a really good network
Yeah.
of friends and family.
Yeah, that can make such a difference.
Yeah, and also, relationships can be impacted
Absolutely. Yeah.
by MS.
It can put a strain on partners,
Yeah.
families, friendships.
Right. It's a big life change.
It is, and it's important for everyone involved
Yeah.
to have those open and honest conversations,
Yeah.
to seek support when needed,
Mm-hmm.
and to remember they're not alone in this journey.
Yeah, for sure.
And then there's the financial burden,
Oh, yeah, we can't forget about that.
the financial side of things. Yeah, because medications are expensive.
Medications, yeah, and then healthcare appointments.
Yeah.
And potentially assistive devices or even home modifications.
Yeah, it all adds up.
It does. It's a significant issue.
So it sounds like there's a real need for more support in
Absolutely.
all those areas.
Yeah. Greater awareness, more research funding, better support services.
Well, I think we've given our listeners a pretty good overview
I think so, yeah.
of MS.
We've covered a lot of ground.
As we wrap up,
Yeah.
I want to leave you with one final thought.
Okay, go for it.
We talked about how environmental factors like geographic location, vitamin D levels could play a role in your risk
Right.
of developing MS.
Yeah, that was a really fascinating part of the research.
So my question for you and for everyone listening is, do you think where you live could impact your risk of developing MS?
Ooh, that's a good question to ponder.
Yeah, think about that.
It really highlights how our environment can impact our health.
Yeah, it's all connected. Well, we encourage you to continue exploring this topic.
Yes, absolutely. Knowledge is power.
Learn more about MS.
The more you know, the better equipped you'll be to navigate it.
Whether it's for yourself or for someone you know.
Exactly.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into MS.
It's been a pleasure.
And we'll see you next time.
See you next time.